Now, a few days ago, it was announced that in 2026 we'll be getting two new Star Wars films, one in May of that year on the 22nd, and then the other on December 18th. And my very first reaction when hearing this news was, I'll believe it when I see it. Which was the sentiment echoed by most others I talked to or saw talking about this, that it was rather hard to believe that after all the difficulties Lucasfilm has had lately when it comes to getting a Star Wars movie into production, much less finished and in a theater, that they'd managed to get two films out in the same calendar year and only roughly 7 months apart. I mean, it's maybe a little hard to believe, but it's already been 3.5 years since The Rise of Skywalker came out, and the next film is still roughly 3 years away, assuming they do indeed hit that date. And for a little bit of interesting comparison here, it only took Disney a little over 3 years to get the first Star Wars film out under them, that being The Force Awakens, after buying Lucasfilm on October 30th of 2012. Though of course we know what happened when Disney essentially rushed that trilogy into production. There was no real solid game plan in place for the overall story, and that aforementioned first film ended up being little more than a nostalgia-laden mystery box that sure had potential to be turned into something decent, if the right person took the helm afterwards. But instead, the story basically got dead-ended by the next guy up, who apparently didn't want to make a middle movie in a trilogy and clearly didn't understand or care that the villains were kinda supposed to win the second act of the story to build tension for the finale, not be cut in half, fooled, and made to look like a hot-headed and incompetent idiot, and have their entire fleet destroyed by the worst character in the history of the franchise. That then left the first guy to come back and finish the trilogy off with a movie so fast-paced that you were hopefully never given a chance to pause and ask how any of this makes any sense or is even happening right now. And he, of course, somehow also brought Palpatine back. In other words, Disney, in their haste to start making money off Star Wars, caused irreparable damage to the franchise, at least for some fans, maybe many who no longer have any interest in Star Wars after the sequels because they were just that bad in their eyes. They lost a good chunk of their hardcore fans after those films, and they've since been followed up by a series of hits and misses when it comes to the Disney Plus shows. And so with the hardcore fan base kind of shattered, that then leaves the more casual fans or average moviegoers who oftentimes just go to Star Wars films simply because it's Star Wars, simply because they've been traditionally thought of as an event film that you had to see. And if we're being real about it, they do make up the bulk of ticket sales. The casual fans are the ones who make up the majority of those huge numbers, and you have to win and keep those people happy to sustain a film franchise like Star Wars. And so there is this part of me that thinks it could, in a sense, for Lucasfilm and Disney, be a good thing that it's taking so long to get a Star Wars film back in theaters. A part of me thinks that it's not only good because it'll perhaps make the films feel a bit more special again, not just for the more casual fans, but also the hardcore fans. I think many of us will agree that one film every year, though perhaps cool or nice in some respects, it made the films start to feel like less of an event than they had with previous trilogies where there was a 3-year gap between the films. Either way, in theory, this long break could potentially be a very good thing for Star Wars. It could mean a lot of hype is generated in a few years when Star Wars finally makes its return to theaters, even though two coming out in the same year and one supposedly also coming out the year after, in December of 2027, will likely end that special feeling pretty quickly, I'd wager. But honestly, as a more hardcore fan who does hope the casuals will also be happy and keep showing up, I'm far less worried about Star Wars feeling special and more concerned not only with the quality of the films, I hope they're good in and of themselves, of course, but I worry that, in a sense, Disney, Lucasfilm, with the 3 films they've announced at Celebration this last April, and by that I mean they announced what the next 3 films are supposed to be about, rather than the more recent announcement of release dates. Anyway, I worry they're making the same mistake all over again when it comes to planning, only in a bit of a different way. Because even though I don't want Star Wars to be handled exactly like Marvel or the MCU, I do think there are valuable lessons to be learned from it, both from their huge initial success with the build-up to Endgame, as well as their more recent struggles. Which is that people love interconnectivity and good, ongoing, linear storytelling that builds to something truly epic. Not to mention it's far easier to keep the casuals vested and understanding what's going on when you adopt that approach. That said, sometimes it can go on too long. Sometimes it might be a good idea to not necessarily reset your whole universe, but to do something that is more or less completely new and different from what you have been doing. Maybe take the story to a new time and place entirely. which is not exactly the easiest thing for Marvel to do since, well, their overall story in a way sort of runs parallel to modern day Earth. And yes, there's obviously major differences between the MCU Earth and our own, like the existence of superheroes and the confirmed existence of aliens, as well as major events like the Snap and, well, alien invasions and the like. Either way, even with multiple universes around them, something akin to modern-day Earth always has been and likely always will be the focal point and basically center of the Marvel Universe. But, for better or worse, Star Wars doesn't have any such rigid restrictions. They can go anywhere, anytime across a vast galaxy, and part of the reason I'm anxious or nervously excited for the upcoming Ahsoka series is that it might be doing just that, going somewhere completely new and different in the Star Wars galaxy, or even another galaxy. And though I don't think it needs to do or should do that exactly, go to a whole different galaxy, I mean, even though yes, that has been done in Legends. Anyway, exploring something new with Star Wars is an exciting prospect for the more hardcore fan like myself. But you can't constantly do that in the films. You do need consistency for the more casual fans. Again, that was basically one of the main keys to success for the MCU, consistency and linear storytelling. Which is where, or why, I think Lucasfilm could be once again making a very big mistake. That their next 3 films are all over the timeline, with one going all the way back, 20-some thousand years back, to the formation of the Jedi Order. And though I've theorized there will be at least a very loose connection between that film and the upcoming Rey film, that Rey will be reading from and learning from the Jedi texts written by those very first Jedi, for the more casual fan or average moviegoer though, this might be a little confusing, if not very confusing. I mean, let's not forget how confusing even Rogue One was to some people, that they couldn't understand where Rey was or why there was yet another Death Star. And yes, I have literally talked to people, multiple people, who have asked these sort of questions. Though honestly, even the most casual of Star Wars fans should have been able to put together where on the timeline that movie was taking place. There are a ton of indicators and clues, and yeah, I'm assuming most did, but not all of them did. And if you are that casual of a fan, if Rogue One was in any way confusing to you because you just don't keep up with Star Wars or pay that much attention to the details, then good luck when the films start jumping all over the timeline and explore all these different eras and new characters constantly, or are predicated, at least to some degree, on you having kept up with the Mandoverse on Disney+, which is going to be the case with the Dave Filoni film. Basically here, if Rogue One can throw people off, what are 3 films in close succession when it comes to release, assuming they do pull off those announced releases? What are they going to do to the brains of the very casual fan or average moviegoer? And that's to say nothing of, say, the Taika Waititi film, which is apparently still a thing, and will likely be its own thing, or not connected to any of these upcoming films. In other words, here we more or less have the same problem we had with the sequels. We're going to get a bunch of Star Wars films coming from different writers and directors that don't really have any sort of true connection with each other. There's still no overall direction for the franchise and grand plan from Lucasfilm. The only difference this time is they're taking their sweet time to not execute that plan, when that's what this time should have been spent doing. These last 3 years or so, I mean. And really, I think it's pretty simple how you handle Star Wars when it comes to the films. You stick with the tried and true trilogy format, and you space the movies 2 years apart to keep them feeling at least somewhat special when they do come around. You also stick in the same time period and with the same characters for at least 1 trilogy, maybe 2, and then move on to something mainly new and different, maybe keeping 1 character who's either much older or much younger, depending on which way you go on the timeline, to have some connectivity and sense of time passage, again, mainly for the more casual fan. To me, that all actually seems pretty straightforward and simple, and I came up with that idea literally on the fly here. It didn't take me 3.5 years of sitting on my hands like Lucasfilm has done. And look, I'm not saying there's no potential for these upcoming films to be good. Hell, they could all be fantastic films, and if you're watching this now and made it this far into a Star Wars video on YouTube, it's very likely you're a big enough fan to understand the timeline and where all these movies will take place. You're going to get it easily enough, or you're going to watch a video that explains it to you. But if you're someone who doesn't even know Star Wars YouTube is a thing, and you, in general, you just go to a new Star Wars film whenever it comes out because it's Star Wars, and you can usually understand the story well enough because there's generally a rather linear story taking place. One film tends to relate to or be directly after the previous film, and there's at least some semblance of a larger story you've been following and remembering from film to film. Well, you're likely going to get rather confused with Star Wars soon enough. You're likely going to start asking, why do I keep going to these movies that make no sense and come out so often? And once you start losing the casuals who were just automatically going because, again, it's Star Wars, that's when Star Wars could truly die. Well, that's all I got for you this time. Now it's your turn to take to the comments below and tell me what you think about all this. What do you think the best approach with Star Wars should be on the film front? Movies all over the timeline and all of the time, or a more focused approach centered around making trilogies spaced out further? I mean, the movies spaced out further. Or maybe you think something else entirely would work. Whatever you do think, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.